Before the first wagon wheel cut a rut into the prairie soil, the American West was an idea. It was a vast, imagined space on a map, a canvas onto which a young nation projected its greatest hopes and deepest anxieties. To the European powers, it was a strategic chessboard. To the cartographers in Philadelphia and London, it was a great blank void, often labeled with fanciful names like the Great American Desert. But to the hundreds of thousands of indigenous peoples who lived there, the Lakota, the Comanche, the Shoshone, the Nez Percé, was not a void at all. It was a homeland, a complex world of ancient traditions, established trade routes, and intricate political alliances. The story of the American West is the story of the violent collision between the imagined space and this inhabited reality, a conflict born from a dream conceived back east. The principal dreamer was Thomas Jefferson. More than any other founder, Jefferson looked west with a visionary's ambition. He saw beyond the Appalachian Mountains, not just to new farmland, but to the creation of an empire of liberty. It was a radical concept, a continental republic, property-owning yeoman farmers, the bedrock of a virtuous and enduring democracy. His vision was agrarian, republican, and fundamentally when Napoleon Bonaparte, needing funds for his European wars, offered to sell the entire Louisiana territory in 1803. Jefferson seized the opportunity. In a single stroke of a pen, for the bargain price of $15 million, he doubled the size of the United States. The Louisiana Purchase was the single most important event in the history of American expansion. It transformed a vague, philosophical dream into a tangible, geopolitical project. The West was no longer a frontier. It was now American territory, at least on paper. With a continent to explore, Jefferson immediately dispatched his personal secretary, Meriwether Lewis, and a young Army officer, William Clark, to lead the corps of discovery. Their mission, from 1804 to 1806, was far more than a simple adventure. It was a military, scientific, and commercial reconnaissance. They were to map the new territory, establish friendly relations with Native American tribes, document flora and fauna, and, most importantly, find a commercially viable water route to the Pacific Ocean, the mythical Northwest Passage. For 2 years, they journeyed through an astonishingly diverse and populated landscape, their survival often depending on the goodwill and knowledge of the people they encountered. Most notably, a young Shoshone woman named Sacagawea, who served as a crucial interpreter and symbol of peace. They did not find a Northwest Passage, but they returned with something far more valuable: knowledge. Their maps, journals, and reports fired the national imagination. They had pierced the veil of mystery, confirming the continent's immense scale and boundless resources. This new knowledge became the fuel for a powerful and dangerous idea that would come to define the age: manifest destiny. Coined in 1845 by the journalist John O'Sullivan, manifest destiny was the belief that the United States was divinely ordained to expand its dominion and spread democracy and capitalism across the entire North American continent. It was a potent cocktail of national pride, racial superiority, and religious fervor. It framed westward expansion not as a campaign of conquest, but as the fulfillment of a sacred mission. It gave a moral justification for displacing the Native American tribes and warring with Mexico, casting these acts as the inevitable and righteous progress of civilization. This idea, born in the minds of politicians and publicists in the East, would serve as the ideological engine for the mass migrations, the technological revolutions, and the brutal conflicts that would define the winning of the West. The dream of a continent had been articulated. The long and bloody process of making it a reality was about to begin. The first wave of American expansion into the far west was not comprised of families in covered wagons. It was a small, rugged, and profoundly unusual group of men who ventured into the Rocky Mountains for a single, all-consuming purpose: wealth in the form of fur. They were the mountain men, and for a brief, intense period from the 1820s to the early 1840s, they were the masters of this vast, uncharted wilderness. Their story is not one of settling the land, but of penetrating it, learning its secrets, and in the process, becoming a unique American archetype of figure suspended between the civilized world they had left and the Native American world they had entered. Their economic motivation was the beaver pelt. In the fashion capitals of London, Paris, and New York, the beaver felt top hat was the height of gentleman's style, creating a voracious global demand. The Rocky Mountains, with their countless streams and rivers, were the last untapped reservoir of this lucrative commodity. Life as a mountain man was one of almost unimaginable hardship and isolation. For months on end, they would work, often alone or in small groups, setting traps in icy streams, enduring brutal winters, and facing the constant threat of starvation, grizzly bears, and hostile encounters. Their survival depended on an intimate knowledge of the land and a mastery of skills that were a fusion of frontier, ingenuity, and Native American technique. They learned to read the landscape, to track game, to find shelter, and to fight. Their existence was defined by a profound paradox. They were the agents of a global capitalist enterprise, harvesting a natural resource for a distant market. Yet they lived a life almost entirely divorced from that market society. They were rugged individualists, but their survival often depended on cooperation with Native American tribes. Many mountain men assimilated deeply into native culture, learning their languages, adopting their customs, and marrying Native American women. These marriages were often pragmatic alliances, securing trade relations and kinship ties that were essential for survival, but many were also genuine, lasting relationships. Figures like Jim Bridger, Jadit, and Kit Carson became legends in their own time. Men who knew the vast, unmapped wilderness of the Rockies better than any mapmaker. The entire social and economic life of the fur trade revolved around a unique annual event, the rendezvous. For a few weeks each summer, trappers, Native American tribes, and supply caravans from St. Louis would gather at a prearranged location in the mountains. The rendezvous was a chaotic multicultural explosion of commerce and debauchery. Furs were traded for supplies for the coming year: gunpowder, lead, knives, coffee, sugar, and alcohol. It was a time of drunken celebration, gambling, storytelling, and brutal contests of skill. For men who had spent the better part of a year in near total solitude, it was an essential social release. But the rendezvous was also the instrument of the fur trade's eventual doom. The intense, unregulated trapping quickly decimated the beaver population. By the early 1840s, the trade was collapsing, not only from overhunting but also from a shift in fashion, as silk hats began to replace beaver felt in popularity. The era of the mountain man was over almost as quickly as it had begun. Most faded into obscurity, but their legacy was monumental. In their relentless quest for fur, they had explored nearly every corner of the West. They had discovered the crucial pathways that would become the great overland trails. The South Pass in Wyoming, a wide, gentle passage through the Rockies discovered by trappers, was the key that would unlock the wagon train migrations to Oregon and California. The mountain men, these rugged capitalists and cultural may not have intended to pave the way for a nation, but that is exactly what they did. They were the trailblazers, and an army of settlers was about to follow in their footsteps. This chapter will demystify the iconic image of the wagon train. It will focus on the reality of the 6-month journey on the Oregon, California, and Mormon trails. The narrative will emphasize that the greatest dangers were not, as myth suggests, Native American attacks, but rather disease accidents. In the brutal, unforgiving environment, we will explore the immense physical toll on both humans and livestock, the rigid daily routines, and the critical role women played in maintaining the domestic sphere in an impossible setting. The journey will be portrayed not as a romantic adventure, but as a grueling test of human endurance that transformed those who survived it. This section will detail the event that supercharged westward expansion, the discovery of gold at Sutter S. Mill in 1848. We will describe the explosion of gold fever and the frantic global migration of the narrative will focus on the brutal, chaotic reality of the mining camps, which were plagued by violence, disease, racial tension, and rampant speculation. We will explore how the gold rush transformed California from a sleepy outpost into a bustling, multicultural territory that achieved statehood in a remarkably short time. The story will also cover the devastating environmental impact of early mining techniques and the catastrophic effect on the Native American populations of California, whose genocide was accelerated by the influx of miners. This chapter will delve into the initial phase of the Plains Indian Wars. It will be framed not as a simple story of cowboys versus Indians, but as a clash between two expanding empires, the United States and the powerful Plains tribes like the Lakota, Cheyenne, and Comanche, whose own power had grown with the acquisition of the horse. We will explore the root of the conflict, the struggle over land and the buffalo. The narrative will detail key events like the Sand Creek Massacre and the Fetterman fight to illustrate the escalating brutality on both sides. We will introduce key leaders like Red Cloud of the Lakota, who led a successful war against the U.S. Army, resulting in the Treaty of Fort Laramie, a rare instance of an indigenous nation forcing the United States to concede defeat, however, temporarily. This section will focus on the single greatest technological driver of change in the West, the Transcontinental Railroad. The narrative will be a story of immense ambition, political corruption, and incredible engineering feats. A central focus will be the forgotten labor of the thousands of Chinese immigrants who built the Central Pacific Railroad eastward from California, and the Irish immigrants and Civil War veterans who built the Union Pacific westward from Nebraska. We will detail the grueling, dangerous work and the racial prejudice they faced. This section will climax with the driving of the Golden Spike at Promontory Summit, Utah in 1869, a moment that physically bound the nation together, accelerated settlement, and sealed the doom of the free-roaming buffalo herds and the Plains tribes who depended on them. This chapter will deconstruct the myth of the American cowboy. The narrative will explain the origins of the cattle kingdom in post-Civil War Texas and the economic logic of the great cattle drives, moving millions of longhorns, north to the new railroad towns like Abilene and Dodge City. We will focus on the gritty reality of the cowboy's job. Long, monotonous, dirty, and dangerous work for low pay. The section will emphasize the true diversity of cowboys. A significant percentage were African American, Mexican, and Native American, a fact erased by popular mythology. The era of the open-range cattle drive will be shown as a brief 20-year phenomenon that was ultimately ended by the invention of barbed wire and the brutal winters of the mid-1880s. This section tackles the Wild West of popular imagination. It will argue that the West was not as lawless as the myth suggests, but that violence was a real and present part of life. We will explore the story of famous outlaws like Billy the Kid and Jesse James, framing them not as romantic rebels, but as products of the social and economic turmoil of their time. The narrative will then focus on the famous gunfight at the OK Corral in Tombstone, Arizona, stripping away the layers of legend to show it as a messy 30-second culmination of local political rivalries, personal feuds, and economic tensions. The role of the dime novel and sensationalist newspapers in creating and exaggerating the legends of both lowmen and outlaws will be a key theme. This chapter will focus on the most famous battle of the American West, the Battle of the Little Bighorn in 1876. The narrative will provide deep context, explaining how the discovery of gold in the sacred Black Hills of South Dakota led the U.S. to break the 1868 Fort Laramie Treaty. We will follow the perspectives of the two main antagonists: the arrogant, glory-seeking Lieutenant Colonel George Armstrong Custer, and the visionary Lakota spiritual leader Sitting Bull, and the brilliant war chief Crazy Horse, who led the largest gathering of Plains warriors ever assembled. The battle itself will be detailed, explaining the tactical blunders that led to the complete annihilation of Custer's immediate command. The battle will be presented as the greatest military victory for the Plains tribes, but also a Pyrrhic, one that enraged the American public and guaranteed a massive, overwhelming military response. This section explores the tragic aftermath of the Indian Wars. With their military resistance broken and the buffalo herds gone, the surviving tribes were forced onto reservations. The narrative will detail the harsh reality of reservation life: poverty, disease, dependence on corrupt government agents, and the loss of traditional ways of life. The focus will be on the U.S. government's official policy of forced assimilation. We will explore the Dues Act of 1887, which broke up communal tribal lands into individual plots, and the creation of boarding schools like the Carlisle Indian Industrial School, whose explicit mission was to kill the Indian and save the man, by stripping children of their language, culture, and family ties. This chapter will be a somber look at the policy of cultural genocide that followed the military conquest. This chapter will be a solemn, focused account of the final, tragic chapter of the Indian Wars. It will begin by explaining the rise of the Ghost Dance, a spiritual revival movement that swept through the reservations, promising a messianic return of the buffalo and a world free of white people. We will show how this peaceful religious movement was misinterpreted by panicked government agents as a precursor to war. The narrative will build to the events of December 29th at Wounded Knee Creek in South Dakota, where the U.S. 7th Cavalry surrounded a band of Lakota led by Chief Bigfoot. The section will detail how a tense disarmament escalated into a massacre as soldiers opened fire with rifles and Hotchkiss guns, killing an estimated 300 men, women, and children. Wounded Knee is presented not as a battle, but as the brutal and symbolic end of Native American armed resistance on the plains. This section will shift focus from the cowboy to the farmer, the true agent of settlement on the Great Plains. The narrative will be centered on the Homestead Act of 1862, which offered 160 acres of free land to anyone willing to live on it and improve it for 5 years. We will explore the immense hardships faced by these sodbusters, the backbreaking labor of plowing the tough prairie soil, the extreme loneliness, and the unforgiving climate, with its blizzards, droughts, hailstorms, and plagues of locusts. The story will highlight the ingenuity required to survive, such as the building of sod houses. It will also cover the diverse origins of the homestead, including European immigrants, former slaves, and single women who claimed land in their own right. This chapter will explore the second great resource rush that transformed the West, moving beyond the individual prospector of the gold rush to large-scale industrial mining. The narrative will focus on the silver boom of the Comstock Lode in Nevada and the copper boom in places like Butte, Montana. We will tell a story of immense corporate power, the rise of silver kings and copper barons, who became some of the wealthiest men in America, and the brutal, dangerous labor of the miners who worked deep underground. This section will also cover the violent labor wars that erupted between powerful mining corporations and the growing union movement, showing how the West was a major battleground in America's Gilded Age class conflicts. This section will analyze how the reality of the West was transformed into the enduring myth we know today. The central figure will be William F. Buffalo Bill Cody. We will trace his career from scout and buffalo hunter to the creator of Buffalo Bill's Wild West, an enormously popular traveling show that toured the US and Europe. We will show how his show, featuring real cowboys, Native Americans, and reenactments of famous battles, codified the myths of the West for a mass audience. This chapter will also explore the influence of dime novels, the paintings of Frederick Remington and Charles Russell, and the early silent films of Hollywood, arguing that these mythmakers created a simplified, romanticized, and largely fictional version of the West that papered over its complexities and brutalities. The final chapter will explore the lasting legacy of the westward expansion into the 20th and 21st centuries. It will argue that the frontier never truly closed. The narrative will touch on several key legacies: the ongoing struggle for water rights in an arid region, a conflict defined by massive dam building projects, the continuing fight of Native American nations for sovereignty, land rights, and cultural preservation, and the transformation of the West into a landscape of federal power, with vast tracts of land controlled by entities like the Bureau of Land Management and the National Park Service. The series will conclude by arguing that the frontier lives on as a powerful idea in the American psyche, a source of our national identity, our belief in individualism and second chances, but also the origin of some of our deepest conflicts over race, resources, and the role of government.